right, welcome back. We're here for episode 25, which is awesome. It's almost half a year of recording every week.
Yes, it is.
We should get an award. Uh,
We should. Is there a word for lasting? I
well,
don't
we
know.
need to win the podcast awards, I think. And I feel like the category we'd win it in is always talking about Meng Wanzhou, right?
It's
She's
true.
like our number one topic because crazy things keep happening with her. Matt, why don't you give us an update about Canada and Meng Wanzhou and tell us what's going on there?
Sure. Okay, I'll call this one the Meng Minute because I think that's how you pronounce it. It's not Ming, it's Meng, something like that. But it's going to be a little bit more than a minute because, Dan, it's been a crazy week,
Oh, yeah?
especially in Canada and what's been going on. So, let's see. Let's start with some of the charges that have been officially laid. So the United States government has officially laid 13 charges, and they have also officially sent those charges to Canada to start the extradition process. So acting U.S. Attorney General Matthew Whitaker stated these things. So 13 counts of bank and wire fraud that
Oh,
relates to the subsidiary of Huawei called Skycom that was operating in Iran. And we already knew Skycom was involved. What's interesting, though, is some of the details that's come out of this. So, of course, Huawei responded to the U.S. Acting General Attorney, and they said Skycom and Huawei are unrelated. They said this has nothing to do with Huawei. And so, of course, they're denying everything. Now, there's interesting things that came out of this. So, not only are they claiming that Huawei broke United States laws, but they're saying the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was broken and that they were committing money laundering.
oh,
Yeah, so those are the charges. And also, there is a secondary charge um, with stealing trade secrets. So this is one that was new. We didn't know about this until it was submitted. And they're basically claiming that Huawei tried to steal robotic technology from T-Mobile to test smartphone durability. So somehow somebody in Huawei had access to these robots and that they were copying the technology and doing a little bit of um, espionage, I guess, to steal that technology. So that was officially sent out, and of course Huawei said no, we completely deny everything. And also this week, the Canadian ambassador to China, his name's John Malcolm, got fired or actually
oh.
asked to resign.
I was gonna
And
say, can you be fired from that?
I think you can, but you can also ask for somebody's resignation if they're a high profile individual. And here's what happened. So it's basically like every day of the week, there was more drama with this guy. So Tuesday, January 22nd, John Malcolm was talking to Chinese journalists and he said, I think Meng Wanzhou has a really good case. And then he gave some advice on what they should do to win their court case. So, first of all, here's a guy that represents a country that has arrested her and he's giving her defense attorneys advice,
That's
right? Like,
insane.
yeah, this is not right, right? He's definitely talking a very different story from what the Canadian government is saying. So that was Tuesday. Then Wednesday, the very next day, of course, many people in the Canadian government were like, hey, this is completely wrong. It's out of line. You should fire this guy. And Trudeau was like, no, 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 it's okay. He must have misspoke. Thursday, John Malcolm gets on the air and he says, I'm sorry, I misspoke. People were taking my comments wrong. I don't know how you can take those comments wrong, but that's kind of what he stated. And then Friday, he was sitting in front of a Canadian reporter and he once again restated a lot of these things that he said he misspoke on. So he said, "Oh, it would be great for Canada if the U.S. dropped their extradition request," and he went off on how this isn't right, is the way he put it. So he was definitely speaking the Chinese playbook. He was not talking the Canadian stance, which is An ally has requested extradition, and it's a due process according to Canadian and international law. And he was talking about how it was all political. And anyways, basically that was after that one that Prime Minister Trudeau called him up and requested his resignation.
Oh, that's interesting. And am I right in the fact that you don't like Trudeau very much as a prime minister, Matt?
Well, I'm probably not as angry at him as most of Western Canada is. But anyways, in this case, I think Trudeau did wait too long to act. I think he definitely needed to rein in his ambassador to China. And it's interesting. I've read some political commentary where they say, hey, this is what China does with officials, so ambassadors. They bring them into China and they try to win them over to the Chinese way of things. And so then these ambassadors, they feel like they're special and they have access to these Communist Party leaders, which is what they should have in the first place because they're ambassadors. And anyways, they start to see themselves as the Chinese government instead of as the Canadian government. So anyways,
a little bit
lots
manipulative.
of people said, yeah, he was compromised and he had to go. So
Crazy.
anyways, interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. One of the other things that you brought up that I find interesting is that they were charged with money laundering internationally.
Yes.
It's so interesting that people can launder money, drug runners can launder money, and cell phone companies can?
Yeah.
What?
Well, it comes back to those charges, those fraud charges. So Skycom, which according to these documents is a subsidiary of Huawei, was using money that Huawei had lined up and funneled it to Skycom. And these banks, these are American banks, lent money to Huawei for Huawei's business, not for business in Iran, which would be breaking American law as well as international law because it was money laundering. They were laundering American dollars through Skycom to Iran.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. So what's all the hype and concern about Huawei?
Okay, so that's a great question. So we've touched this a little bit in the past, like why is everybody concerned about it and why is this such a big deal? And a lot of people out there are saying, look, and I think this is probably the most proper concern. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with having this thought pattern, but then we'll go through why I think it's more than this. And the argument is this is just the United States trying to push out a competitor. So China's competitive. The United States is the biggest economy in the world. China was rapidly growing and still is. And the United States has a lot of these telecommunication companies, and they would rather have American telecommunication companies become stronger. And so they see this as a competitive economics battle. And I'm sure that's the Chinese way of looking at it too. And so that's one argument. However, when you actually get down into the individual details, it really does look like where there's smoke, there's fire. And in this case, it is concerning to many people. So the first thing that was brought up in these charges is, number one, Huawei's ties to the Chinese government. So we've got to remember that this is not like an American or a European or a free world company which acts on its behalf, has to work within the law like we're used to. But this is actually a company that is in communist China. And communism, they own those companies. Now, you could say, well, the new Chinese economy really is trying to separate the government from these companies, but let's not kid ourselves. This is still a government that owns just about everything that's coming out of their country. So when people are concerned about the Chinese government then going to Huawei and saying, okay, you have all the infrastructure of these 5G networks in the United States, we want you to turn them off, or we want you to spy, or we want you to do something that can disrupt. We want you to steal technology, information, right? These are the types of concerns that they have.
Oh, that's really fascinating.
And
Um, yeah.
there have been Chinese companies that have been caught, right? So here's the other problem. It's not a this could happen, it's a this has happened. And so it's happened on a smaller scale. Do we want to take the risk on a larger scale? So here's some of the things that they can do. This is one of the concerns. Chinese tech companies could be compelled by the Chinese government to modify their technology for spying.
But they did
And
say that they don't, right? Like I remember we
sure,
talked a few podcasts ago where they came out in a statement and said,
we don't.
we don't. Yeah.
And maybe they don't, but it doesn't mean they couldn't be asked to,
Right.
right? And that's a concern. And maybe it's just like, to me it was pretty obvious that those Russian spies that we reported on were Russian spies, and the Russian government says we don't know who these people are, even though they were high-level Russian spies and identified as high-level Russian spies, right? Like, do you really trust them? So this is what the U.S. Department said this week. The immense influence that the Chinese government holds over Chinese corporations is a threat to America's economic and national security. So that's a quote from these documents. So what kind of modifications can they make? There's the attacking the supply chain, and this is where the producer makes a change to either the software or the hardware before it actually gets to the end user. So if the United States or the Canadian government put in an order, and they might even inspect all the equipment that they're going to buy. So these routers, these antennas, the networks, they can inspect it and say, okay, there's no spyware, it can't happen. Well, this stuff isn't made yet that's going to be installed and put in place. Are they going to inspect every router? Are they going to inspect every antenna, every node? And with 5G, these nodes are going to be all over the place because that's the nature of 5G. It has to be close together. So, that's what they're mostly worried about. And in the past, according to Bloomberg, now a lot of this still has to be proven, but Bloomberg Business Magazine reported earlier last year that computer components from a company called Supermicro had been subtly modified during manufacturing in a Chinese factory.
Whoa.
And Apple and Amazon both use those chips. So, you could argue, well, that hasn't been proven, but it also hasn't been proven that it didn't happen. And China has been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Just in December, 2 Chinese agents, so not rogue people, actual Chinese agents working for the Chinese government, were caught stealing from 12 countries, of which the United States and Canada were part of. And this is a quote also from the United States documents. We're talking about state-sponsored actors engaged in illegal behavior. So
that's interesting.
That's where the concerns are coming from. So it's not this could happen, it's this has happened, and do we want to take the risk with such a huge infrastructure project like this?
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I can see why you're concerned.
So what do you think, Dan? Or do you think that this is much ado about nothing? Do you think, and I also see the other side of things. This could be the United States government protecting American companies that could also be installing the same equipment. And Huawei is cheaper. In fact, they're hugely integrated into Canada's 4G and 3G networks. Hugely integrated. In fact, if Canada decided not to use them for 5G, the interacting between the old Huawei equipment and the new whoever installs it is going to take a lot of work.
Oh, no. Well, I think you can look at it 2 ways. We might be just being a little bit too paranoid, Like, have you ever seen the original Batman movie where if they used shampoo and soap together, it would make them go crazy? Do you remember that one?
No, I don't
anyway.
remember that.
It just reminds me of that where it's like, these big corporations are out to get you. I don't know. Maybe they're not. Maybe it's just a cheaper solution and we're overreacting.
Maybe. But on the other hand, would you rather overreact and be safe, or say, oh, I'm just overreacting, and then all of a sudden your 5G network shut down, or trade secrets are stolen, or, right? Like, would you rather err on the side of caution and maybe be considered paranoid, Or would you rather try to be open and trusting and then be taken for a ride?
Well, I'd like to actually create more Canadian and American jobs, by using American companies for this 5G network. So um, I could see a political benefit of doing that, but I don't know. Sometimes the cheapest person wins.
Well, in this case, Huawei is the cheapest person, and that's probably part of the concern. So, Dan, I got a question for you. Speaking
Yeah.
of cheap, it looks like our Facebook privacy is worth 20 bucks. Tell me about that.
Yeah, okay, so this is funny. I mean, we're talking about this Chinese company spying on us. How about Facebook, right, from Northern California? So,
Yeah.
have you ever done one of those things on your phone where you go to a restaurant and they say, if you fill out a few surveys for us, we'll give you a
Yeah.
coupon so you can get a free pizza. I have lots of friends that do that. They go watch movies, they go get
Yeah.
pizzas, they're secret shoppers at the Gap, and they get all these free things. But they have to give up some of their private information. They have to write surveys and they have to talk about their experience. And all of this is marketing and it helps the companies become better. Well, Facebook did the same thing a few months ago. They offered people generally between 15 and 35 the opportunity to download one of their apps that would watch what they were doing
Mm.
online to kind of see what their target audience was doing. And it actually gave them $20, I believe, a month in the form of a gift card in order to do this. So there's a few things that bother me about this. Number one, it bothers me that I'd be tempted to do it because, hey, 20 bucks is awesome.
Yeah.
But number two, um, they're actually monitoring every single move on the web. And it's interesting because we've talked about VPNs a lot on this podcast. And the
Hmm.
way how Facebook was kind of doing this was by installing a VPN on their cell phones. And this VPN was an app that was called Facebook Research, and it gave access to the user's phone and internet activity. And so that would actually give them access to their photos and videos sent to others, emails, web searches, web browsing activity, and
Mm.
even their ongoing location information. And so chats and everything. So, I mean, if you were doing business on your phone, or if you were maybe traveling and you didn't want people to know where you were, Facebook was watching them the whole time. So what do they get in exchange for all of this illusion of privacy? $20 gift cards per month. And so that's a little bit ridiculous, especially considering the Cambridge Analytica scandal that Facebook just
Yes.
went through, and their stock prices got hammered. And actually, they're
Yeah.
up again today because they did really well this quarter. But yeah, they
They
got
made all
hammered over
kinds of
that.
money. They only paid 20 bucks a month per
That's
person.
right, per person.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things that are obnoxious about this VPN that Facebook installed. Number one, it wasn't on the App Store.
Yeah.
And so we've talked a little bit in the past about how when it comes to Apple iPhones, it's really difficult to install an app on your phone if it's not on the App Store.
Hmm.
One workaround that you have is that Apple has an app for beta testers. And I actually used it quite a bit for my games. So before I put my game on the App Store, I would get my friends to download this beta program, and everyone would be able to install it before it went on the App Store. Pretty cool. But Facebook went around that and they actually used their own thing. Um, and I believe they used it from Betabound, Utest, or Applause. And it's just like Apple's beta, but it's a third party. And so they were actually able to install this app on your phone without using any kind of an Apple infrastructure. So that really got
Wow.
Apple mad.
Yes.
And they even went as far as asking people to take a screenshot of their Amazon purchase history as well. So I thought that was a little bit
Ooh.
crazy. So Facebook might argue that the people who signed up for the research program, they consented to have their data harvested.
Well, of course they did. They're taking screenshots of their Amazon purchasing.
Yeah. But I mean, they were looking at everything. I mean, they had access to people's emails and their
Yeah.
location and photos. So Facebook actually decided Tuesday night to shut down the program for iOS users.
Mm.
but it's still available on Android. So if you guys want a $20 gift card and you're not
Yes.
ashamed of the photos and locations that you go to, run. Don't walk over to the Facebook App Store. So Facebook's funny. Their rebuttal is, despite early reports, there was nothing secret about this. It was literally called the Facebook Research App.
Yep.
It wasn't spying, as all of the people who signed up to participate went through a clear onboarding process, asking for their permission, and were paid to participate. And they said less than 5% of the people were teenagers. And so they
Mm.
were targeting people 15 to 35. And the big uproar in the community was you were targeting teens, people
Underage.
underage, and
Yep.
you had access to their photos, which is really creepy.
Yes, it
Uh,
is.
I mean, they were giving away their private information for $20. But we've talked about this before, Matt, that really when you sign up to anything like Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, you're literally giving away your information for free so that you could
Hmm.
use their services for free. And they make a lot of money off of it, as per the stock market today.
Yes, they do. All right. Well, let's talk about things that can help the stock market. So I've got another article that I read. It was on Cheddar, the Cheddar Report, and this one's about Apple and how they're trying to boost their sales. So we know in the news it's been all about how bad iPhone sales have been. I mean, they're still an amazing selling phone. It's just they've been constantly selling less than people were expecting to, and not selling as many as they have in the past. So now what Apple's doing, one of their new things that they're trying to do is bring in subscriptions from people subscribing to services. And this one's a game service. So imagine it's like Netflix for video games. So the way this was found out is I guess they've been talking to game developers and they're trying to convince them to come onto a subscription service with Apple, and then they can get exclusive content. You know how like the PlayStation has their exclusive content, and Nintendo has their exclusive content, and Microsoft Xbox has their exclusive
I want
content.
my Bejeweled exclusive content.
I want my Farmville. Wait, that's
Clash
Facebook.
of Clans.
Clash, yeah. So that's what they're trying to do is create a subscription service, and that's a great way to lock somebody in for just constant revenue generating. Instead of buying $1,000 iPhone once a year, they can get $1,000 or more out of somebody just for them constantly subscribing to their service.
Well, and I
So
think it's wise, and even Microsoft did that with Microsoft Office. Did you see that
yes.
you can't purchase Word anymore?
Oh, I
You
thought you still could get a standalone.
Well, you might be able to, but on the App Store on your Apple computers, it's like, I don't know, $30 to $50 a year or something
Yeah,
crazy.
it's crazy. That's a
That's
lot of money.
crazy. That's a lot
Yeah.
of money for something you can do on Google
Yeah.
Drive for free.
Well, that's brought in a lot of money to Microsoft when they went to a subscription service. And, it's understandable that they do that. And for some people, they feel it's worth it. In fact, I'd love to hear from our listeners. Why don't you email us or comment below and tell us why you like Microsoft 360, or maybe tell us the opposite, why you don't. One of the advantages to a subscription service like that is you will always get the latest updates. So you'll always be working in the latest and the greatest. And I think it comes with cloud storage, and you can access your documents from anywhere in the world, any device. Sure, that's great, but is it worth the amount of money they're asking for? I personally don't feel it is, but for others, obviously it's working for them.
I don't know. I mean, remember when we used to use Word Perfect back in the day to write our
Yes.
essays with that blue screen?
Oh
It's the
yeah.
same thing. I mean, you control B, you got the bold font. I don't know. Are things really changing with Microsoft Office and Microsoft Word? Ooh, you've got the new features. I don't know. I think
Yeah.
the one
Look
10
at your
years
new
ago is fine.
formats. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I got to tell you, I am a heavy Excel user. And as a heavy Excel user, there are things I can't do on Google Docs
Okay, that's
or
fair.
Google Sheets, right? I can't do pivot tables yet. Macros, right? Like those heavy duty things just aren't built in yet. So, I can see me using Excel for a long time now, unless we can get a cheaper competitor that can still handle things like pivot tables and macros.
Well, I heard they're working on pivot tables. They might even be there, but I'm not sure. Maybe some users could tell us. Really quick, though, I wanted to comment on this subscription for games. I think it's really great. I think they're going to overprice it. One thing I liked about Netflix was how they started out at $7.99. It's a shame
Yes.
that they're up in the teens now.
Hmm.
But I don't think they're going to go low and go high. I think they're going to start high. The
Ah,
other thing that I wanted to bring up that just drives me crazy about Apple is
yep.
that they force people to upgrade, not because their hardware is terrible, but because they upgrade to iOS 13.
Yes.
And I actually just read an article today that said it's possible that iOS 13 will not include the iPhone 6S or my iPhone SE. And
Uh,
it's fine.
and they're
There's
selling SEs. We
I
reported that last
know.
week. You could
They
buy a
just
brand new SE.
and in a few months, maybe you won't be able to upgrade it. And they're going to have all these new features, and the new features, I guarantee you, are not going to be so CPU intense that you can't upgrade it. They simply want your money. And I think they realized that in their last quarterly call. I was reading some of the um, some of the things that they had said, and they basically were saying that they lost a lot of money because people's batteries and the phones were fine and people were not purchasing new phones. So their way around that is every 2 or 3 years, we're going to make the old phones obsolete, even though they're fine, so that they can get all the new features.
It's like a subscription,
It's like a
only every two
subscription.
years.
I think they're catching on. Everyone's figuring out that the way for money in tech is subscriptions, and it is also to kick people off out of old stuff and make them buy new stuff.
Well, and in games, it's all about the microtransactions. But
Yeah.
EA sure learned the hard way when they did their Star Wars game where fans revolted,
Oh,
absolutely
yeah.
revolted. Yeah.
No, that's fascinating, Matt. Well, it'll be interesting to see how this subscription goes. I personally am sick of subscriptions. I do not pay for Spotify. I do not pay for Hulu. The
Ah,
only one that I pay for is for Netflix because I've been
yes,
doing it for so long. But I'm not paying for Apple Music. I'm not
yes,
interested in paying for Xbox games or the PlayStation game subscription. I
yeah.
mean, if you add all of these up, it's like $200-300 a month on stuff that only you sometimes use. Take
So,
me back when you can
yeah,
just buy a game.
I
I
have a subscription. So I'm going to tell you right now, I completely agree with you. I think subscriptions is the best way to spend a lot of money and in little tiny transactions once a month. And then when you add it up, your mind is blown with how expensive it is.
yes.
But we do subscribe to the PlayStation. What is it? The
Is isn't that like $20 a month?
No, you can get discounts. So there was a Black Friday sale and we got it for 50% off. And I think it was like $50 for a whole year.
Okay.
Yeah, so 50 Canadian for a whole year.
All right.
So
So like
yeah,
12
it's pretty
bucks.
good. And every month you get free games. So PlayStation Plus, that's what it's called.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and my kids love it. And I think because we have it, we don't buy a lot of games. In fact, we just buy the occasional game. And like maybe once a year or twice a year, we'll buy a game, and the rest is part of the subscription. So if you consider it the cost of buying one game a year, like $50 is the cost of one really good, expensive new game a year, and you get the subscription, and every month you get 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 games that you can download, then that my kids love it.
So one other thing that I worry about with these subscription services is what about the little guy, right? Like,
Oh yeah,
are the games being made by, people in their garage, or people aren't going to see
yes,
them because they're not
the
going to be
indie
on the
games.
subscription. Yeah, the indie games aren't going to be on the subscription service.
Yeah, yeah,
So I don't know. A lot to think about.
yeah.
And
Let's have comments.
yeah, tell us if you like subscribing to things or if you just like paying for it one time, or maybe you pirate it. I don't know. Maybe you go on the Pirate Bay. I don't know.
Is that still a thing? The Pirate Bay? I thought it was shut down like 5 times.
Well, they keep moving to different places, and I don't know if you're ever going to shut that down. So we'd love to hear from you, and actually, we would love it if you took some time to give us a 5-star rating on the iTunes on Apple Store. Also, if you are on the Google Play Store, please rate us 5 stars and leave a generous comment.
We'd love it, and we'd even read your reviews on our show.
Yeah, and actually subscribe to us if you're on YouTube right now. And other than that, we will talk to you next week.
Bye.